Hey guys, what's up? Drastic Great here, back again with another video, and today I'm going to go over some chess basics. So basically what that is chess for those who know how to move the pieces. And the only requirement this video has is you know how to move the pieces. And you know what en passant is, you know what castling is, you know how to move your knights, your bishops, your rooks, your everything. And so briefly, before I jump into main content of this video, I'm going to go over some piece values. And so I'm going to start with the rook. The rook is worth 5 points, the knight is worth 3 points, the bishop is worth 3 points, the queen is worth 9 points. The king, if you don't have the king, you're not playing chess, so the king is an infinite amount of points. The bishop is again 3 points, the knight is again 3 points, the rook is 5 points, and pawns, they're all 1 point. Okay, so now I'm going to jump into the content of this video, and I'm going to start off with the most important thing in chess for the opening, and that is central control. Make sure that in the opening you try to get as much central control as possible. And a nice example of this is playing the move e4. E because it's on the e file, and 4 because that's 4. So e4 immediately controls 2 squares in the center. And there's no other better move than this, because they all either are equal to this and control 2, or they don't control 2. The other moves that control 2 are knight f3, which controls 2, d4, and of course knight c3, but that move is bad for a reason that we might get to in later videos. But this move, it controls 2 squares of the center, and actually one of the most common responses to this move is actually the same move. And it controls 2 squares of the center, and now the center is being fought for by both players, and both players are doing an excellent job in the opening as they're fighting for the center. Another thing you might see with this other example is, yes, black copies you again because your move was great. And with this example, which also controls 2 squares in the center, black might copy you again because as black recognizes, these are all great moves. And so black might copy you. And so now I think that's the basics of chess in the center, and make sure that you get the center because center is the high ground, and in wars, you all probably know this, but when you have the high ground, you can start pushing onwards towards the low grounds, because it's harder to climb up to the high grounds than it is to go down to the lowlands. So it's harder for black to, let's say, make a bunch of useless moves like this and then fight for the center, rather than if he just does it immediately with this move. Okay, so next, you kind of understand how the center works and why you should try to get the center in the opening, such as moves like this, and this, and this. And next, we're going to talk about development. And I'm going to talk about why e4 is called best by the test. Maybe you've heard that saying before, but if not, it's all okay. It's all good. And so, why do we play e4? And that is for 2 reasons. First, it controls 2 squares in the center, and that's the reason that I went over in the previous section. And the next reason is this next thing I'm going to get into, which is called development. And that is where you get your pieces so that they are not on the back rank, basically. Basically, your piece here is probably development. Any piece basically anywhere that's not on its starting square is basically development. But you have to make sure you're developing your piece to the right square. And how do you want to do that? You want to develop your piece so it puts pressure on the center in the opening. And so basically, what does that mean? So a reasonable move here was, let's say, black copies you with e5, and you play knight f3. And this puts pressure on the center, see, it fights for 2 squares in the center, and it also develops a piece. So you not only have developed a piece and got more pieces into action, but you're also attacking his pawn immediately. So this move is basically free because black, unless he wants to lose a pawn, he has to do something about it. And the most common move here is actually knight c6, which protects the pawn and also continues to put pressure on the center. And next, I'm going to talk about indirect pressure on the center. So while, yes, these pieces immediately attack the center, both of them, you could also play your bishop here, which you might say, oh, it doesn't have any control in the center at all because the bishop doesn't control any squares in the center. But you'd actually be wrong, because the bishop here is attacking this knight, which is directly attacking the center. So this bishop is actually, therefore, attacking the center as well. And this is why this is one of the most common moves, because the knight controls 2 squares, right? And if the bishop were to go to c4, it's only fighting for 1 square. Well, bishop e5 is simply fighting for 2. So while both of these moves are fine, this move is the more preferred move by masters. And so now I think that you basically understand how development works, and piece and the central control. Make sure to develop your pieces toward the center in the opening and get all your pieces out and castle. And so next I'm going to go over my next sort of section, which is common mistakes with these 2 rules. And so a common mistake you can make is, let's say he controls center, this is controlling the center, these moves both control the center and activate pieces. Knight c6, and a common mistake we see with beginners is them bringing their queen out too early. And so why should you not bring your queen out too early? And now I'm going to tell you why. It's because any piece can attack the queen, and the queen will want to move. So I'll go to another example I have here, which is this example right here. The queen does not want to take the rook because the rook is worth 5 and the queen is worth 9. While the rook does want to take the queen because the rook is worth 5, and as I said, the queen's worth 9. That's a favorable exchange for black and an unfavorable exchange for white. And so any piece can attack the queen, and the queen will probably want to move even if it's defended. And so this move is a very common move amongst beginners because it immediately attacks the f7 pawn, which is only defended by the king. And actually, if black were to make a silly move like knight f6, well, you'd have mate in 1. So you have to make sure that you don't make a move like that. Instead, you make a much better move, such as g6, which prevents the queen from eyeing here, and also creates some squares for your bishop. And so the queen, they're persistent. They continuously want to checkmate you. And so what would you play here? You would actually play knight f6, which protects this f7 pawn, because now the queen is no longer pressuring this. And you also prepare for bishop g7 and castles. And so this is a very common refutation to the 4-move checkmate, as it's called, or otherwise known as scholar's mate. And so you really shouldn't move your queen in the opening because it's going to get kicked away. And as we can see in the final position, black has the same amount of development, and white just has less space overall. His queen is blocking a regular development square for the knight. His knight's probably going to go here. His bishop is not open yet, while black's bishop is. Just black has a lot easier time developing here, and in the opening, white is supposed to seek an advantage. But in this position, black is either slightly better or it's equal, and that means white has nothing to prove for his extra move at the start of the game. And so next, I'm going to go over another pretty common mistake that beginners make, and that is too many pawn moves. So generally in chess, when you're developing, you should try as hard as you can to get all your pieces out. And pieces do not necessarily include the pawns. While pawns are pieces, you more so want to get all of these guys out before you try to get your pawns out. And so I'm going to show you an example of where pushing too many pawns can go terribly wrong. So let's say they play d6, which protects the pawn and also opens the bishop. This isn't a terrible move, but what follows is going to be a whole collapse of black's entire position. We play bishop c4, preparing the castle, developing our piece to control the center, and this is overall a great move. They play c6, fighting for that same square, but they're just not developing. We play knight c3, fighting for that square again and developing a piece. They play g6, again moving another pawn. They're trying to play bishop g7, but they should just develop their pieces with something like knight h6. We castle, getting our rook into the game. And here's the real killer. They play b5, sort of attacking our bishop. And they might think, oh, we're getting a free move. But no, here's the real shocker. They've moved so many pawns. They've moved 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 consecutive pawn moves. And that has actually lost them the game. After the stunning move, knight takes b5. Because they have moved too many pawns, so we're going to punish them for it. They take with their pawn, And we play bishop d5, picking up the rook for the knight we lost, which, as you know, I stated at the start of the game, rook is worth 5, knight is worth 3, that's a favorable exchange for us. And so that is why you don't move your queen in early game, and you don't move your pawn in the early game, or the opening as we like to call it in chess. So thank you guys for watching. If you found this video helpful, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and goodbye.